There's a name buried in sealed court files, a name whispered through the rusted teeth of Appalachia. A man so genetically looped, so biologically distorted, he was no longer called human by those who found him. His face didn't match symmetry. His words never came. His eyes never blinked. And you were never supposed to know he existed. But now that you're here, I have one question. What happens when blood forgets how to evolve and begins to consume itself? They called him the most inbred man in American history. But he wasn't born evil. He was born into a system that chose silence over sanity. Not a crime scene, a cradle. A genetic dead end wrapped in tradition and denial. In the forgotten woods of odd West Virginia, the family tree didn't branch, it coiled, twisted, turned inward again and again until it collapsed into a spiral of deformity, silence, and madness. This man, let's call him Ray, wasn't born with a chance. He was born with centuries of bloodline compression stamped into his skull. His parents? Second cousins. Their parents? Also cousins. By the time Ray took his first breath, his DNA looked more like a corrupted file than a blueprint for life. He never went to school, never spoke a full sentence. His face bore the unmistakable signs of genetic folding. Narrow jaw, low-set ears, and eyes that seemed to drift in opposite directions. Locals said he grunted, sometimes barked. Other times, he'd just sit for hours, scratching the dirt, as if trying to remember something that never happened. Medical intervention never came. The government didn't look. Because in these parts, secrecy isn't a glitch, it's the rule. But Ray's story isn't just about backwoods horror. It's about what happens when a nation ignores its own rot, when family values becomes the excuse for generational collapse, and when the system, not just the genes, ensures that monsters aren't born, they're bred. You're not watching a documentary. You're opening a vault, sealed by shame, guarded by fear, and filled with truths this country never wanted unearthed. Ray wasn't the only one. He was just the one they couldn't hide anymore. Let's strip away the myth for a second. Forget the image of old cabins and banjos echoing through the hills. This isn't a caricature. This is calculated decay. Ray wasn't an accident. He was the result of a systemic pattern, one where isolation is enforced, not by fences, but by shame. Where tradition becomes more powerful than truth, and where a child born into a closed loop is taught from birth that silence is survival. You ever heard of pedigree collapse? It's what happens when a family interbreeds so many times their ancestry tree folds inward. What should be hundreds of unique ancestors becomes just a few repeated names over and over and over until eventually the body starts to fail. The mind starts to short circuit. And identity, what makes us us, begins to blur. Ray had siblings. They didn't speak either. One was found eating soil. Another, blind in one eye, used to wander the woods barefoot, humming to no melody. No records, no names. Just echoes in the valley. Locals say the Whitaker family, yes, the real surname, was off. But no one did anything. Not the schools, not the churches, not the state. Because when a bloodline becomes a curse, people look away. Do you understand now? This isn't about one family. This is a mirror, held up to a nation that loves to boast about freedom and progress while whole generations rot in silence, one chromosome at a time. And the darkness? It didn't stop at Ray. There are still children being born into that family, still carrying the twisted code passed down like a secret handshake. But here's what most don't want to hear. This doesn't just happen in the hills. It's in the suburbs, in religious communities that reject outside influence, in fringe political groups, even in elite dynasties where power is preserved by keeping blood pure. Because control, real control, isn't taken with force. It's passed down in whispers, in traditions, in rituals that look harmless from the outside, but rot everything they touch from within.
You're not just watching a descent. You're in it now. And if your heart's pounding, that's good. It means your body recognizes what your mind's still catching up to. This story, it's already in your bloodstream. Now listen carefully, because this is where things shift. This isn't just a story about families. It's about systems, about how entire institutions, schools, governments, churches, let this happen. You ever wonder why no one stepped in? Why Ray was allowed to live and die in a state of arrested evolution, surrounded by siblings who barked instead of spoke? Why no doctors, no social workers, no one with a clipboard ever came down that dirt road? Because it wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A long, slow decision made by layers of bureaucracy that didn't want to open that door. Because if they opened it, they'd have to admit something horrific. That America has pockets of controlled decay, and they're not just tolerated, they're protected. You think these families hid themselves? No. They were allowed to disappear, buried under the lie of cultural privacy, excused by local tradition, shielded by the unspoken agreement. If we don't look, we don't have to act. And this is where the psychological control begins. See, if you're born into it, if your mother is also your cousin, your uncle, your sister's father, you don't question the pattern. You can't, because it's the only world you know. And those who raise you, they were broken long before you were born. You want to know the real horror? It's not the deformities. It's not the silence. It's not the missing school records or the warped faces. The real horror is compliance. These families don't rebel. They don't run. They repeat. Because the cycle is a cage passed down as a legacy, and every generation becomes less human, not in soul, but in structure. You've seen this before, even if you didn't realize it. In cults, in extremist religions, in closed communities that value obedience over growth. What you're looking at now is just the biological aftermath of long-term psychological control. Now ask yourself, how much of your world is built on repetition disguised as tradition? How many things have you accepted just because your father did, or his father before him? Ray's bloodline wasn't just twisted, it was programmed. And so are you. Comment below. Blood remembers blood. Blood remembers blood. Let the algorithm see it. Let yourself feel it. This is the part they'll try to silence. The part that gets shadow banned, flagged, erased from the polite corners of the internet. Because now we're not just talking about forgotten families. We're talking about designed neglect. Ray's condition, his collapse, wasn't random. It was the natural result of intergenerational programming, not in some sci-fi sense, but in the quiet, everyday horror of unchecked obedience. You see, when you fold the same genes together for too long, you don't just deform bodies, you deform will. You shrink the ability to question, to rebel, to escape. What's left isn't a monster. It's something worse. A person too broken to know they're in a prison. Ray didn't scream. He didn't ask for help. He didn't resist. Because no one taught him how. And that is how control wins. Not with chains, but with generational numbness. Now, think bigger, wider. Look past the cabin in West Virginia. What if this pattern of folding, of repetition, of enforced obedience didn't end with isolated bloodlines? What if it was scaled up? How do you keep a society compliant? You reward sameness. You punish deviation. You whisper the same mantras across decades. Respect your elders. Keep it in the family. Tradition matters. And slowly, silently, the family tree stops growing. It starts circling.
Repeating, flattening, until what once was a people becomes a herd. Let me ask you, have you ever felt that tug deep in your chest, like something's wrong, but you can't name it? That nagging suspicion that you were born into a script already written for you? That's not imagination. That's memory. Cellular memory. Your blood remembers. Even if your conscious mind has been trained to forget. Ray's body carried centuries of silent decisions. Yours does too. The only difference? He was born too broken to escape. You still have a chance. But if you don't face what you are, what's been hidden in your own bloodline, then you're no different. This story isn't about hill people. It's about you and what happens when you let shame write your biology. In the next section, we go deeper into the elite lineages, the ones who knew what they were doing and did it anyway. You've seen the rot in forgotten cabins. You've heard the silence in bloodlines left to decay. But now it's time to lift the veil on something even more disturbing. Intentional inbreeding among the powerful. Not out of ignorance, not out of isolation, but out of strategy. Let me take you back. Not to a mountain town, but to boardrooms, to secret societies, to American dynasties whose names you know, but whose methods you were never meant to understand. Families like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Bush lineage, the European royal houses that quietly married cousins to keep bloodlines pure. Not to survive, but to preserve control. Because here's what they understood. When you keep power in the family, when you close the loop, you protect the empire. Money doesn't leak, influence doesn't scatter, and loyalty, it's built into the DNA. But there's a cost, always. Mental illness, recessive genetic disorders, unexplained deaths, children sent away and never spoken of again, whispers of schizophrenia, deformities, and strange fixations on purity and obedience. You've seen it before, just dressed in silk instead of dirt. The same patterns that shaped Ray shaped kings, presidents, CEOs. And still today, behind gated estates and generational trusts, there are names you know who are descendants of inbreeding, of bloodlines folded with precision, not by accident. Why? Because power isn't just about money, it's about heritage, lineage, blood. The elites believe in it more than anyone. They study it. They guard it. They design marriages to protect it. You think monarchies disappeared? They just changed form. You think genetic manipulation is new? It's not. It's ancient. And the ones at the top? They never stopped playing God with their own DNA. But here's the truth they won't speak. Every bloodline, no matter how rich, carries ghosts. Every empire built on purity eventually cracks. Because biology doesn't care about status, only balance. And when you ignore the laws of nature to maintain control, nature always takes her payment. So now ask yourself, how many leaders have been shaped by closed-loop DNA? How many decisions, wars, policies, disasters were made by men not in full possession of their faculties? Men bred to obey, not evolve. Ray was just a shadow. The elite, they are the architects. Now we enter the chamber they buried beneath 100 lies. The one that holds not just broken families, but broken ideologies. The place where science was hijacked.
Where genetics became theology, and where blood became a weapon. You've heard of eugenics, but what you haven't heard, what they won't teach you, is how far it went, and how it never truly stopped. In the early 1900s, eugenics wasn't fringe, it was fashionable. Funded by universities, championed by presidents. It was the belief that bloodlines could be purified, that the undesirable should be sterilized, isolated, erased, and the elite preserved, multiplied. Thousands were institutionalized, not because they were dangerous, but because they were poor, non-white, differently wired, or descended from inbred lineages like Ray's. This wasn't science, it was genetic class warfare. The goal? To erase what they called feeble-mindedness, but what they really meant was non-conformity. And if you think this stopped with World War II, think again. After the Nazis turned eugenics into genocide, the public face of the movement collapsed. But the machinery, it just changed names. New institutions, new language, same obsession with blood purity. What do you think designer babies are? Gene editing, selective IVF. They're just eugenics with better branding. And in secret rooms, behind the scenes of genetics labs funded by global elites, there are experiments still being run, not to cure disease, but to engineer desirable traits, obedience, aggression, conformity. You think Ray was forgotten? No, he was studied, cataloged, His blood, his broken genes, used to justify funding, to drive research, to answer one dark question. How do we prevent another ray without disrupting control? And here's where it goes from dark to sacred. Some elite bloodlines, ancient families with names we won't say here, believed they were chosen, not just lucky, divine, and that their blood was holy. So they inbred on purpose, to concentrate the gift, to protect the divine spark. It's not just pseudoscience, it's ritual. And every time a child was born wrong, every time the blood collapsed, they didn't stop. They just hid it better. We've gone from cabins to castles, from silence to science, from survival to manipulation. But in Next We Cover, we go where most won't follow, to the symbolic meaning behind all of it. Why blood matters to the powerful, why it terrifies them to lose control of it, and why they'll destroy entire generations rather than let new blood rise. You've made it this far. You're not the same anymore. But the final truth, that's the one that changes everything. Now we reach the final descent, the place beyond science, beyond biology, where blood becomes mythology. Because the truth is, this obsession with bloodlines, it's not just genetic, it's spiritual. In ancient cultures, Babylonian, Egyptian, Mayan, Druidic, blood wasn't just life, it was power, the medium between gods and men. Rulers weren't chosen for their skills, they were chosen for their blood. Because blood was thought to carry memory, ancestral will, divine authority. And that belief didn't die, it mutated into royal dynasties, into secret societies, into whispers of blue blood, sacred lineage, and the right to rule. Today they'll tell you it's symbolic, that power is earned,
that leaders rise by merit. But behind the veil, the old logic still stands. Control the blood, control the future. Ray's story and those like his aren't just horror stories. They're warnings, reminders of what happens when blood is trapped, folded, corrupted. Because the same pattern that warped his DNA is being mirrored in institutions that refuse to evolve, closed circles, repeated ideas, recycled leaders. Dynasties in business, politics, even religion, all afraid to let new blood in. Why? Because new blood means change, means unpredictability, means a loss of control. So instead, they preserve the old code, even if it breaks people, even if it breathes silence, deformity, decay. This isn't just biology, it's design. And that design has a purpose: to keep you small, disconnected from your origin, unaware of your potential. Because if you knew what was in your blood, what your body remembers, you'd never submit again. You'd awaken. And awakening is dangerous. So they bury it. Under rituals. Under shame. Under families like Ray's, used as cautionary tales, when in truth they're reflections of what the system does to all of us. It repeats. It isolates. It silences. But now you've heard the scream inside the silence. Ray's name was never meant to reach you. Nor Gracie's. Nor Lorene's. Nor Rita's. But it did. And now it's yours. Don't forget them. Don't forgive the system that let them collapse. Comment "Blood remembers blood" one more time. Say it twice, not for me,
but for the algorithm that tracks truth like a shadow, for the part of you that just woke up, for the part of you that will never go back to sleep. You've crossed over now, and from here on out, you don't see the world like the others do, because your blood remembers. And it's time you started listening.